Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's deeper dive with Buffalo Bayou Partnership. My name is Jessica McFall, and I'm the Communication and Membership Coordinator for Buffalo Bayou Partnership. If you aren't familiar with who Buffalo Bayou Partnership is or haven't attended one of our webinars, we are the nonprofit that's revitalizing and restoring Buffalo Bayou from Shepherd Drive to the Port of Houston Turning Basin. And with that being said, as we move our efforts eastward along Buffalo Bayou, past downtown, we are revitalizing that stretch and including the neighborhoods surrounding that stretch of Buffalo Bayou. So today's webinar is all about how we're including those residents and what steps we're taking to do that. Today you'll be hearing from BBP board members Gloria Centeno and Gaynell Floyd Drexler, as well as VP of External Affairs Karen Farber. So I will hand it over to Karen.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you all for being here with us today. We're very excited to talk about this topic, an inclusive Bayou. It's one that's personally very important to me. And it's a conversation that we've been steeped in at the very least since my arrival, which at the organization, which was just this past May. And then the organization has also been steeped in for years and years. Before I arrived, of course. And we're going to talk a little bit about what inclusion means, how it plays out in public space, our master planning process for the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods and the waterfront. And we're going to hear from our board members as well. So let's start with the Buffalo Bayou East master plan. Many of you may have joined some of our prior deeper dive conversations in which you heard from Ann Olson, our president, and Jose Solis, our project manager, about Buffalo Bayou East. But for those of you who are not familiar with the master plan, here's a little overview of the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods. On the left side of your screen, roughly, is the downtown area. And then you head east as you head toward the right side of your screen, and on the right side of your screen, you'll find basically the Port of Houston Turning Basin. And so as a point of reference, Nympazon navigation was just added right here to the screen for those of you who sort of need that as a point of reference for the neighborhood. So out of the master planning process came 4 core values: authenticity, connectivity, inclusivity, and resiliency. We're talking about inclusivity today. And really what inclusivity is about at its core are people. So we're talking about people and communities and neighborhoods and how really people are going to be included in these spaces that we'll be developing in Buffalo Bayou East. So we're going to get a little bit into the history of the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods. And one of the reasons that this is really relevant is to understand who we're talking about when we talk about inclusion. Who and what are we talking about? Who are the people and the cultures and the places that are included in our thinking and that have a voice in how we develop these spaces in Buffalo Bayou East? So we're joined today by Gloria Centeno and Gaynell Floyd Drexler, who are 2 of our board members who are very, very familiar with these neighborhoods. And we're so thrilled to have their guidance as we develop the master planning process and all of these sites that we're talking about. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gloria to talk really specifically about East End and her experiences with the people and places of East End.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be a part of this today. As Karen mentioned, my name is Gloria Centeno, and I'm one of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership board members. I'm also one of the co-chairs of this new committee called DEIA, which stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility. So I'm happy that today's segment for this webinar is talking about inclusiveness of the Bayou. So a little bit about myself. I'm a native Houstonian. I grew up in Houston's East End, but I spent most of my childhood in Houston's 2nd Ward. In fact, my family goes back nearly 100 years in Houston's 2nd Ward. There are several communities in the East End. You may have heard people talk about Eastwood, Idlewood, Hidalgo Park, Pecan Park, Magnolia Park, and Second Ward. There are amazing people that have come from the East End, true trailblazers, in my opinion. And if you're not familiar with the Mexican American History and Cultural Mural at Heritage Park downtown, it really demonstrates the many people that came from East End. The mural that's up right now, it includes immigrants from Mexico that in the beginning of the century developed and built our railroads. They were part of the Port of Houston. They are really responsible in building the transportation and the transporting of the main artery on Harrisburg into Houston. Other more well-known names in the mural are Mama Ninfa and State Representative Christina Morales, at-large council member Gracie Sines, Yolanda Navarro Black, Felix Fraga. There's so many that are outstanding from the East End. I'm happy to share that my father-in-law, Roberto Zenteno, and my sister-in-law, Norma Zenteno, are also included in the mural for their contributions of their music. The Zentenos were definitely well known in the East End. Their music, they were a family musical dynasty. There was an article in the Chronicle in the early 80s that talked about there was the Osmonds, the Jacksons, and then there were the Zentenos. They were pretty well known in not only the East End, but in Houston. And that was definitely because of my father-in-law, who was from Mexico. And when he came here in the 1950s, like many people from Mexico, he settled in Magnolia Park. And Magnolia Park is considered one of Houston's oldest Hispanic neighborhoods. In 1890, Magnolia Park was laid out on a 1,374 acre site on Harrisburg. The plot was owned by Thomas Brady, and the community was named for its over 3,000 magnolias that were planted by the developers. Magnolia Park was a community that was organized in 1909 and then incorporated in 1913. And another very historic neighborhood is Second Ward. It's also referred to as Segundo Barrio, which means second neighborhood. And this beautiful mural here is because of State Rep Christina Morales. This mural is at her place of business. You may have seen it. It's all navigation, pretty close to El Tiempo and Ninfas. And it was important to her to have some kind of signage in Second Ward because it's such an historic neighborhood. And unfortunately, we don't have any signage or markers of Second Ward, but I'm happy to share that she's working on an initiative called the Second Ward Signage Project, and several people from the community to make sure that that happens. Also, Bo Fraga, who's also from Second Ward and part of Buffalo Bayou Partnership's board, is part of that initiative. There's a school, this school that is called Lubbock Elementary. Many of my family members, including my father, my uncles, my older sisters, attended this school. It's on Harrisburg, well, it was on Harrisburg and Sampson. And just so you kind of understand the location, it's right near where Champburger is on Sampson. But the school, when it was there, faced Harrisburg, where the rail is now. The school's been gone for a while. But now New Hope Housing is there, which is an amazing organization that provides affordable housing and supportive services in the community, which is greatly needed. Another amazing landmark is Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. And a lot of my family members, my father, not only attended the church, but also went to school there. It's another great landmark. The church is on Navigation and Jensen. It was constructed in 1911, was the first Mexican-American church in Houston. It was the first religious institute in the city of Houston that offered religious services in Spanish. The church opened one of its first schools for Mexican American children, and it operated programs that provided food and shelter for needy individuals. Many of the masses are held in Spanish. The surrounding neighborhood is predominantly Hispanic, although that's changing. And it's also important to share that Our Lady of Guadalupe is the oldest Catholic elementary school in Houston. My dad not only attended the school, but my parents got married here. So I definitely have a long connection with the community and even this church. Another amazing school is Rufus Cage. It's an elementary school. It's one of the oldest public buildings still standing in Houston. It was built in 1910 as a county school. It's a two-story mission-style brick schoolhouse, and it served generations of East End families up until 1983. The school's still there. It's on the corner of Telephone and Lawndale in the East End. There is a new school that is Cage Elementary, very close by on Leland Street. City Gas Park, to me, is the hub of Second Ward and the community and the residents. I have fond memories of Second Ward. My family and relatives spent a lot of time there. Softball and baseball tournaments were a big part of not only this community, but this my family. My father, in this photo in particular, he's on the far left. He was part of, a lot of the Latin leagues that weren't even really allowed to have leagues in that time. As a child, I didn't realize a lot of these things. I didn't realize what my parents went through, what my grandparents went through, a lot of obstacles to be able to even accomplish something like this. So I'm really happy that my parents and my grandparents helped pave the way for things like that. This is the Maxwell Coffee Plant on Harrisburg. And again, such a great memory. I mean, everybody in the East End could smell this coffee from pretty far away. I mean, I have memories of that smell because going to my grandparents' house. The plant is still there. I'm not sure what the future holds, but it's still there. Murals are very common in the East End to reflect our history and culture, and there are many, many murals in the East End. If you're interested, you could go to the East End District website where they have an interactive map where you can see where all the murals are in East End. But I thought it was important to mention this mural. It has definitely some significant meaning. It's called The Rebirth of Our Nation, and the original muralist was Leo Tanguma. He did this mural to pay homage to this Chicano liberation movement in 1973. It was an important movement of that time. The mural is still there on the cannery on Canal Street, but it was revived by an artist named Gonzo. I know many people know who he is. And in 2018, I was there at the dedication, and it was quite moving to see this mural revived. So in closing, as a person that's from Houston's East End, and my roots are here, I'm still part of the community, I certainly welcome new development because that is definitely going to benefit our community in so many ways. But I also do have big concerns, like many residents do, of that have been here for decades, and how will they be able to sustain the change? And not only that, but the possibility of losing our identity and our history and culture. And it's my hope that we are able to keep the history and the culture preserved while new development is coming to the East End. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. That is a great segue both to continuing this conversation about the context in which all this work is happening, and also to hand it over to Gaynell, Floyd Drexler, another board member of Buffalo Bayou Partnership, another member of our DEIA, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Committee, who has been very active in these conversations about Buffalo Bayou East and how to include everyone. So Gaynell.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on today's panel. I'm Gaynell Floyd Drexler. I'm a current board member of Buffalo Bayou Partnership, and I'd like to share with our viewers a small glimpse into the historic Fifth Ward. I am not a Fifth Ward native, but I have developed a great affinity for this historic community, beginning with my decades-long work with Houston Habitat for Humanity, who introduced the concept of affordable housing in Houston by building its first homes in the Fifth Ward in the 1980s. I've also participated over the years in efforts to preserve and maintain the evergreen Negro Cemetery in the Fifth Ward, and I've been a volunteer over the years with the former Street Garden in the Fifth Ward. So all of these experiences combined have fostered my affinity for this Houston community. The Fifth Ward is affectionately known to many as the Nickel. It is a historic district located northeast of downtown and bounded by Buffalo Bayou, and it has strong immigrant and post-slavery origins. As African American slaves were freed, they settled primarily in the Fourth and Fifth Wards of Houston. And the rich fertile land to the south along the bayou was once known as the Bottom. The early houses of the Fifth Ward were typically shotgun shacks that consisted of just a few rooms, and they were very closely built. As the ward grew, so did the erection of buildings and schools and institutions. And there was a great fire in 1912 that swept through and did significant damage to the area. An old cotton plantation became the site of Fifth Ward's historic cemetery, Evergreen Negro Cemetery, and it contains the remains of former slaves, Buffalo soldiers, and prominent African American leaders of the Fifth Ward. And burials took place there up through the 1940s. The Fifth Ward has some pretty unique cultural assets, including ethnic pockets like Frenchtown, where Creoles from Louisiana settled. And from Frenchtown, this music known as Zydeco was born. And it was a very wonderful blend of Texas blues and Louisiana Creole music. And who doesn't love Zydeco? There were also a number of Italians who settled in this ward in the early days. Also anchoring the community were several churches, as religion played a key role in uniting the community. Today, there are about 5 or 6 churches in the Fifth Ward that are over 100 years old, including our Mother of Mercy in Frenchtown, our Mother of Mercy Catholic Church in Frenchtown. Pleasant Hill Baptist Church will celebrate its 100th birthday in a few short years. And this church is pastored by Fifth Ward community leader Harvey Clemens, who is also a member of the Buffalo Bayou Partnership Board. As Fifth Ward grew, Lyons Avenue became a busy and robust hub of culture, Black businesses, and pedestrian activity. It drew comparisons to Harlem's 125th Street. The landmark Deluxe Theater was a cultural center for entertainment, and Club Matinee was a very popular destination for listening to blues and jazz. And although the Nickel was an isolated cultural ward, it was a dynamic, thriving, and cohesive community up until sometime in the 1960s. The ward began to show signs of decline right after the civil rights era. Desegregation allowed many of the more affluent families to leave the ward and settle in other parts of Houston. Also around this time, the racially biased federal highway system cut a huge swath through the heart of Fifth Ward, dividing the community, including the slicing of the historic cemetery in two, and with it, the loss of nearly 500 graves of African Americans to I-10 freeway. For decades thereafter, the ward struggled, and the Nickel became what some call the Bloody Fifth. Lyons Avenue became known as Pearl Harbor. Violence, crime, and poverty marked the community. At one time, Lyons Avenue was considered one of the most violent streets in America. But despite it all, Fifth Ward is a very proud and determined community. And the Fifth Ward of today has experienced a remarkable renaissance, and they celebrate this every year with an annual Renaissance Festival to mark this seasoning of reawakening and reinvestment. And taking the lead in the redevelopment effort is the Fifth Ward Redevelopment Corporation, led by Kathy Payton. The Fifth Ward also has an active civic association. One of the most significant and oldest institutions in the Fifth Ward is Wheatley High School, named for a slave girl who was captured in Senegal, and she was brought back to Boston, where she later became America's first Negro poetess. So Wheatley High School and the Fifth Ward has produced some nationally known leaders like Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, Congressman Mickey Leland, boxing great George Foreman, and Ruth Simmons, who is the former president of Brown University and now president at Prairie View A&M. And as in many minority communities, there are murals in the Fifth Ward that pay homage to this rich culture and heritage. One such mural is the one that depicts 12 of the most prominent sons and daughters of the Fifth Ward. Again, it is a community that's committed to growth and redevelopment, like the reopening of the Deluxe Theater that lay shuttered for, I believe, more than 40 years. There's also the Julia Hester House, and several community gardens have sprung up to offset the food desert. This is a cultural stronghold in Houston with its unique soul food restaurants, community centers, barbershops, street poets, and fine artists like Texas Artist of the Year, Jesse Lott, who lives and works in the Fifth Ward. There are community-specific art centers, again, like the Deluxe, and so many other hidden gems. And with its proximity to downtown, developers have already begun to seize real estate. And this concern, like Gloria mentioned in the East sector, is that development does not cause gentrification and the displacement of the long-term residents, and that the pride and dignity of the Fifth Ward is respected. And I am, like Gloria, excited that the partnership is developing this magnificent waterfront green space amenity that I know the residents of Fifth Ward so richly deserve, and that we will do so in a way that is inclusive and recognizes and respects the needs, the values, and the cultural and historical assets of this great community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaynell. That was fabulous. Really, really important context and information for all of the work that we're doing, and really conveys how the fact that we have Gaynell and Gloria and Reverend Harvey Clemens and Bo Fraga, who were mentioned as members of our board, among others, is guiding the way that we proceed with our planning and with our development of Buffalo Bayou East. So I want to talk a little bit about how this organization has a track record of doing this work and has really learned from experience. So Buffalo Bayou Park is the project that we are best known for, of course. And Buffalo Bayou Park itself was guided by the objective of becoming an inclusive public space. And being in the park, as most of you probably have been, you will experience how diverse and hopefully inclusive that space feels. That was not by accident. Buffalo Bayou Park was also developed with tremendous community input through a planning process. And the park has now very proudly celebrated its 5th anniversary. And hopefully all the way along the way, it's perceived as inclusive of a space as any, really used by all Houstonians. So we have learned through this process as Buffalo Bayou Partnership how to be guided by community input. There are particular challenges and opportunities that are inherent in Buffalo Bayou East. And particularly when it comes to the objective of creating inclusive space, we need to acknowledge that public spaces are not always inclusive. and that communities of color have been excluded very deliberately or by accident from public spaces many, many times in our history. So we have an eye toward these particular goals: environmental justice, which we'll talk about, but really thinking about the context of a largely industrial neighborhood that is also very much a thriving residential set of neighborhoods. Development without displacement, which is really about including people in how we do this and bringing assets to people that can come along with the amenities that we'll also be bringing. And celebrating neighborhood history and culture, as we're doing in this conversation, hearing from Gloria and Gaynell. And really keeping those communities intact and their histories and their cultures can lead and guide us in how we develop Buffalo Bayou East. So some solutions. Really, the most important solution in dealing with these challenges and opportunities is to work together. So in the master planning process, we worked with these partners and others, and we held many community meetings that led to the master plan itself. So we worked closely with neighborhoods to reach out to people, and all of this was done before COVID times. We were able to meet with people in person, hear from them, get their input. You can see some of the comments that came through those community meetings here, and there were so many others. And as we go on with this process, it will be an iterative process. So we will constantly be saying, here is what we heard from you. Here is what that looks like. Did we get this right? And that will happen all the way throughout this multi-decade master plan unfolding in Buffalo Bayou East. The goal is to create places where people feel safe, welcome, and reflected. And that means that the cultures that Gaynell and Gloria talked about so much are reflected in these spaces, and people's needs and desires are also reflected. So this is an image of a recent event in which the master plan was unveiled, and also pre-COVID times, but just recently in 2019, we held an event at Turkey Bend, which is one of the focal point sites within the Buffalo Bayou East master plan, where we included people in an event to get to see the site, which it has largely been inaccessible, and to get some sense of what the master plan encompasses. So the other thing that we're doing as a solution to the challenges of creating inclusive public space is we've established this diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility committee of our board that will guide all of the work that we do, and we'll be engaging with people inside and outside of the organization to have conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And so Gaynell and Gloria are very active in those conversations, as are many other of our board members. So diving a little bit into the Buffalo Bayou East master plan, we just want to have a little bit of a conversation about what's in the master plan, especially for those who have not seen any of these images, and how those are indication of the kinds of inclusive public spaces that we want to create. So this is really with an eye toward inclusivity. And these are images from the master plan. We're not going to sort of get into the details of what we're looking at, as much as to know that these are all sites within Buffalo Bayou East. And really, they're, in addition to being inclusive, we're also looking at connectivity, which is another one of the core values of the master plan. And looking at this bridge, it's a great metaphor for how we're going to be connecting communities to one another. One of the things that is particularly characteristic of Buffalo Bayou East is the separation of neighborhoods by the bayou itself, in addition to the separation that Gaynell talked about that has been largely with transportation development. The bayou itself divides 2nd Ward from 5th Ward, and one of the things that Buffalo Bayou Partnership can do to remedy that is to create pedestrian bridges across neighborhoods to enable people to connect with one another. We heard a whole lot in the master planning process that people didn't spend a lot of time in the other neighborhoods that were part of Buffalo Bayou East, even though they were very close by. And some other things that we heard a lot of, the desire for spaces where families can gather, access to nature, access to the waterfront, places to eat and drink and gather when we can do that again. And so we are really reflecting back in the master plan these needs and desires that we heard from neighborhood residents. One of the other major needs that was articulated and that addresses this concern about gentrification is affordable housing development that is a part of the master plan that Buffalo Bayou Partnership will be developing with other partners. And this is just an aerial view of what is being planned on this site. So for context, Tony Marone Park will be, oh great, this is good. We can see an overview here, but Tony Marone Park will be to the west of this site. And here is a sense of what the actual affordable housing development will look like and where it's located. So it will be a waterfront affordable housing development that really responds to the very emphatic need that was articulated for more housing to enable communities to stay intact and for neighborhood residents to stay in their neighborhood. The other way that we aim to be inclusive, and this is a big one in Buffalo Bayou Park as well, is through working with partners in the neighborhoods. We'll be developing a community-based arts and culture committee, which we talked about in another recent deeper dive. And we will also be working very closely with many, many organizations in the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods, including organizations we've worked with in the past, like the East End Bike Group and the East End Wellness Walk, and many of the arts and culture organizations that are in Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods, as well as organizations that are focused on health and wellness, organizations that are focused on economic development, education, ecology, and connection to the waterfront via the natural spaces that are along the waterfront and biodiversity, and how we can connect people greater with the, what's already in their communities. And so here is a set of images of things that are already in Buffalo Bayou East that we can just help to amplify and bring into both our planning efforts and how we celebrate the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods. So I don't know, Gaynell and Gloria, if you want to add anything, but if not, I'm going to hand it back over to Jessica.
I'm fine. I'm curious to hear if there's any questions.
Oh, you're muted, Jessica.
Sorry, Zoom problems. Thank you to Karen, Gloria, and Gaynell for taking time today to speak to this huge project we're working on, and we really appreciate their time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat box. We already had a few come through, so we'll get to as many as we can. Gloria, actually, this first one is for you. I believe it was asked during your section. That first mural that you showed, where is that located?
Yes, it's at the Heritage Park downtown, and it's permanently placed there. I highly recommend that everybody comes to see it firsthand. It's just awesome. And again, it's the Mexican-American history culture of the 20th century. And it has some amazing contributors from the East End that are included in it.
Thank you for that. Karen, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. It might be a question for our project manager, but how much of the Lockwood South residential development is actually affordable housing?
The answer is all of it is affordable housing. I am not an expert in residential development, so I can't get any more technical than that, but we will definitely have opportunities for people to gather and ask questions about the housing development, because we were totally certain that in presenting one slide about it here, we would have lots and lots of questions that I would not be equipped to answer. But really our point in showing it is to say there was a community need for affordable housing that was articulated, and we are meeting that need, but it will be affordable housing for multiple income levels.
Great, thank you. Somebody asked about the bike trail connection. Do you want to talk a little bit about what trails are connected right now and what the plans are for those that aren't connected?
Also with that, I can't really speak to trails that well. That's really one that can be answered best by, when we did our Buffalo Bayou East presentation and by our president, Ann Olson, who's spearheading the planning process. But we definitely will be having more presentations about that. And I don't know how much detail we got into in our past deeper dives about that, but those are all available on our website, so people can watch those. But we will make sure also that we respond to these questions over time.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that land along that stretch of Buffalo Bayou is privately owned. So we're working on acquiring that, and that takes some time. So
it's very different from, I will say this, it's very different from the development of Buffalo Bayou Park because of what Jessica just said, because the land is a patchwork essentially of land we own, land that other people own that we can get easements over, land that we can acquire. And so that's why the Buffalo Bayou East Master Plan will take as long as it will to realize.
okay, someone asked, what is the next phase to open and when? And this is a question we get pretty often.
Yeah. So there are phases of the master plan that haven't been announced yet in terms of being contained phases, but some of the nearer term projects that we're working on are the affordable housing project. And by the way, I'm going to say this because I just mentioned that there will be opportunities for input, and that this is not just lip service. This is very sincere. There will be opportunities for input on every one of these projects, even the ones that are coming up sooner. Because they'll all be still some time out, and there will be opportunities as it's an iterative process to take in more input on what we're planning. But the affordable housing project at Lockwood South, Jaffet Creek, which is the tributary that we saw an image of a while back when we were showing master plan images, that was very heavily wooded, and there were children in the image. That's one of the really beautiful sites that we'll be developing that's on the 5th Ward side of the bayou. Turkey Bend, which is a stunning and very exciting site that we used as the launch for the master plan, the launch event for the master plan, are some of the focal points that we can develop. Trails take longer.
This is also related to affordable housing. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but what is the timeline for the affordable housing on the waterfront?
Yeah, I think we'll have to have another conversation about the affordable housing where we can give more details about it. I'd really like to be able to, but I don't want to say the wrong thing.
How can we support the master plan? Will there / have there been any delays given COVID?
Fortunately, we really have not encountered delays other than that we'd like to be able to gather people to get input in person, and that's very hard to do right now. But beyond that, we've been very fortunate in that we've received some foundation funding that has made some of our initial work possible in a very significant way. So we have not been delayed in a funding respect so far, and we're very, very excited that that's been the case. But we also need to make sure that we can keep getting input from people so these spaces really will be inclusive. And so definitely look for these opportunities for virtual meetings, especially if you're in the Buffalo Bayou East neighborhoods and you want to participate in giving us feedback and input on the sites.
Yes, and to add to that, as far as support, we're always looking for donations, and you can actually specify where you want your donation to go. And that's just if you go to our website, buffalobayou.org, there's a donate button.
And I've just received input also from our project manager who's watching, who told me that phase 1 of the housing project will tentatively open in 2 years. As we all know, these things can change a bit in their timelines.
Yes, thank you. Tell Ian thank you for that.
Yeah.
Will BBP maintain the existing trail between Tony Marone and Guadalupe Plaza?
Can't so much answer that one either. There will be trails that connect the entire waterfront, but in terms of how trails are getting moved, I'm still, again, getting up to speed on the trails and how all the projects will be developed from a capital standpoint.
Yes, and somebody else asked about the repairing of the bike trails east of downtown. And again, that all depends on funding and city ownership and things like that. So, and they could come from different places too. So that's a question that can be asked. If there are any questions you have that might be specific, you can always ask me, and I can forward it on to the right person. So someone asked, did the 2nd/5th ward bring this lack of inclusivity, or did the BBP first broach the need to bring the neighborhoods and BBP master plan together?
That's a great question. And I assume that the person who's asking the question means, did neighborhoods come to us or did we go to neighborhoods, right?
Yes.
And I was not there, but my understanding is that it has been a long conversation, and that, for example, our president, Ann Olson, who's been with the organization for 25 years, has known members, leaders in the East End and 5th Ward for all of those 25 years, and has been in dialogue with people from the neighborhoods. And Gloria, maybe you can attest to this as well, because those conversations have been going on long before Buffalo Bayou East Master Plan was developed and revealed.
Yes, I mean, I've known Ann before Buffalo Bayou, and certainly I would see her out in the community constantly. And even when she asked me to join the board, I'm like, oh no, I don't think I can do that. But she put a lot of emphasis on how important my voice was from the community, and I appreciated that. And so she's definitely been active and had a big understanding of this need long before.
Mm-hmm.
And
go ahead, Gaynell.
It's Gaynell. I have to agree with Gloria. I think that the partnership has definitely made a more deliberate process of community engagement. It was recognized very early on that we needed the input of those particular communities, and that deliberate process of inclusivity and representation and what we hope is trust building was initiated by the partnership.
Thank you for that. And a great question from the same person. How are the wards contributing beyond board participation, DEIA committee, and how will this be funded?
In terms of neighborhood stakeholders as partners and Buffalo Bayou East as investing partners, there are partnerships all the way along the way. And again, from an external affairs programming and public art standpoint, I can't really speak to all of those things, but we're pursuing partnerships with many neighborhood agencies, and many of them are already invested in it, in the Buffalo Bayou East planning and the execution of it. But I think there's a lot more to come. I did want to return to a question that was asked, because I'm getting input and feedback from other folks as we talk. And I've been told some of the trails, going back to the trails, some of the trails will be reconstructed and some will be new, and we'll also be doing erosion repair.
So someone asked about East River, and I do have to say that's not something we're working on. That's actually a Midway project separate from Buffalo Bayou Partnership.
What East River will do, for those who are familiar with it, is it will open up that site that was gated off before by the former KBR site that was there.
Yes, and we will ensure that there is a trail along Buffalo Bayou on East River. That's
right. So we won't be cutting off. They won't be cutting off access. We will actually be able to, go along. It'll be contiguous there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if no one else has any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And we have one more question. Are there any plans to incorporate environmental and historical to the 2nd and 5th wards? And I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, I think that it depends on exactly what the person asking the question means by that, but I think that's really what we're working to convey here is that so much of what we're going to be doing will incorporate both environmental elements and historical elements of second and fifth wards. Our area of jurisdiction is the waterfront largely, and some of these sites that we're talking about and that are in the master plan. But even beyond that, and this is really why we wanted Gloria and Gaynell to talk about second and fifth wards, is that we will be reflecting the neighborhoods and the culture of the neighborhoods and the history of the neighborhoods on our sites, even when we don't have control over, you know, what goes on in the other parts of the East sector.
Yes, and this person asked this question twice, and it has to do with the Army Corps of Engineers flood mitigation study in this part of the bayou and how that will affect the East. And can you speak to that, Karen? Or
I can briefly speak to it, which is that it won't. I just happened to hear our president, Ann Olson, answer this question with someone else. So my understanding is that the report addresses the section of the bayou up to Sabine Street, but also so we have not seen anything in that report that would go beyond downtown. But Jessica, I don't know if you want to tell folks about the opportunity to respond to that report, since Jessica knows a bit more about this.
yes, so if you're not familiar with what's going on, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers released a study about resiliency and flood mitigation plans that would cause significant damage to areas of Buffalo Bayou, including our jurisdiction, which is from Shepherd Drive to the Port of Houston turning basin, and a lot of their solutions are outdated and could impact the environment negatively, as well as the aesthetics of Buffalo Bayou Park. So we have on our homepage, buffalobayou.org, an alert at the top of the page that you can click on, and there's a letter that you can copy and paste and email directly to the Army Corps of Engineers. The comments actually close tomorrow, so if you're going to do it, please do it as soon as possible, and that will help them rethink what their plans are and hopefully put into consideration environment and the work that we've done.
And there are many agencies that are far west of us that are also very, very active in advocating against this report. So do know Katy Prairie Conservancy and many others are very active in this conversation.
Exactly. And our project manager, Ian Rosenberg, just said our projects will protect as required lands and improvements through the east of Buffalo Bayou, to go back to the question about the Army Corps of Engineer work. So that will help answer that. But okay, we're wrapping up a little bit early, but we hope you guys all learned something. Thanks again to Gloria and Gaynell, board members of BBP, as well as Karen Farber, our VP of External Affairs, and wanted to also say happy birthday to Karen. Today's her birthday, and she is doing this on
Happy birthday.
So thank you, Karen, for your time.
Thank you all so much. Gloria and Gaynell, really appreciate your presentations about the neighborhoods, and I know many others did as well.
Yes, and if you have any more questions, feel free to email me, jmcfall@buffalobayou.org. Visit our website, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and we'll be sending out the recording tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.